So, my story, where to begin? I suppose I'll go right back to the start. Many years ago, I don't want to say I was directly injured by getting vaccines, but it definitely seemed to be a catalyst moment that made me start questioning about pharmaceutical industry and also using poisons to supposedly heal ourselves. There was a couple of instances where I got vaccinated, and after I got vaccinated, I would have varying degrees of symptoms and illness. And one of them was actually getting the so-called illness that I was supposedly getting vaccinated against, and particular to the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccine. If you know what pertussis is, it's also named whooping cough. About a month after I got this vaccine, I supposedly got this so-called illness that I had been vaccinated against. It definitely woke me up, and I started questioning, why are we getting vaccinated if we're going to get this illness anyway? That was kind of one of the moments where the questioning inside of me began. Then I was vaccinated another time for travel vaccines, and I got incredibly sick. Well, I was sick for a lot of the time that I was actually away. And then when I got back, got very sick and was diagnosed with what is called Ross river virus, which I've now come to understand is most likely related to severe parasite infection. That aside, so I started questioning vaccines and wondering what their true purpose was. And when I had been diagnosed with this so-called Ross river virus, I actually visited a naturopath. He was probably the one who red pilled me to a certain degree. She breadcrumbed me with things about fluoride, and then she'd asked me if I'd been vaccinated recently, and then instead of just giving me the information, she said, well, maybe you should do some research about that. And I did, and I went down the proverbial rabbit hole with it. She also woke me up to the idea that parasites are a big issue. She had a bioresonance machine, and she was picking up all kinds of stuff in my body, and she said that I had a systemic parasite infection. From that point onwards, I started getting really interested in how I could heal myself, and I started experimenting with a number of different things. The Candida diet was actually the first one that I kicked off with. That involved doing generally 3-day vegetable broth fasts to start, and then you would go off onto a specific diet after that. And it wasn't plant-based, there was still flesh involved, but it was relatively quite clean. So I did have some success with that, and it definitely brought me back to a level where I could function again and live my everyday life after being chronically ill with this, what is known as Ross river virus. From then onwards, I was kind of put on this path of investigating and learning how to heal myself. I definitely experimented with a keto diet. I'm not gonna lie, and paleo. I've tried all of those those lifestyles or diets, as you may say. I would have a certain level of success, but then I would plateau. I just kept questioning, well, why? I knew that food had a big thing to do with how I felt and our overall health, but I just couldn't quite put my finger on what was right and what was wrong. Then I started experimenting with a blood type diet, and I found that I did have varying levels of success with that as well. However, again, I would plateau. Over time, I had just learned to normalize certain symptoms of disease. And I think society does this as well. They normalize certain things as it's just a part of getting old, or like you just have this genetic disposition to having this kind of disease or symptom. And to me, in my mind, it just never made sense. And I always just thought, I had this knowing that optimal health and vitality means that we don't live in disease and we don't have symptoms. And it always just felt somewhat quite out of reach, but I knew it was there. But to me, the blood type diet made a lot of sense. There's a lot of science behind it that makes sense, like having different blood types. It means we're going to be reacting different to different things, and we physiologically must be different. And I'm like, well, this makes sense. So I really dug in deep with it. But at the same time, this is the paradox about my lifestyle, is that At the same time of being really interested in health and wanting to heal myself, I was also actually participating in really harmful and self-destructive behaviors like taking drugs, drinking alcohol, being involved in toxic relationships, all of these things that contribute to external and internal poisoning, right? That's the thing, like so many men and women in this day and age, they'll eat healthy and they'll do these things, but they'll still do all these really harmful things, on the side, and then question why they're getting sick all the time. For me, I inherently knew that these behaviors were not good, but I was still doing them. And then that aside, I also had a number of other issues as well. So I was a chronic binge eater for many years. And I think a lot of us are actually binge eaters without even knowing, because we're programmed from children to be binge eaters, especially when we're babies, because our parents tend to give us food when we're little children, when we're emotionally disrupted. So if we're frustrated, sad, or angry, usually the first thing that happens is that our mother or our father will just go, "Are you hungry?" and they'll put food, or shove it in our face, and then we learn to regulate our emotions with food. So, from childhood, I was a binge eater. I did have my fair share of emotional trauma as a child and growing up. That obviously flowed into my eating patterns as an adult. It would get quite bad to the point where I would binge eat sometimes till I would actually have to purge and vomit. Sometimes that was because I had physically eaten too much, and other times because I felt so guilty about the foods I was putting in my mouth that I would go and make myself vomit. As a result of my binge eating over my adult life, and this is going over, a couple of decades, my weight would fluctuate. So I would go up and down in my weight. There would be times where I would be sometimes incredibly thin, and then sometimes I would be morbidly overweight. And I'm talking, at one point, I got up to over 100 kilos. So yeah, binge eating was definitely a problem for me. And then as a result of that, I had all gastrointestinal issues. These are things that I suppose I didn't realize how bad they were until I got on the other side of detoxification. To give you an idea of what symptoms I would experience, so the weight fluctuations, that's a big one. Brain fog, so just like lack of mental clarity. And this would also affect my emotional state, so depression, anxiety. I just had just no drive for myself, because it always felt like I was in this constant stuck or freeze state. It was really hard for me to achieve things that I wanted to achieve in my day-to-day life or for myself. It was really easy for me to achieve other things for other people, but for myself, I would never put myself forward. So it's a lack of self-worth, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say here. Issues with my GI tract. I had very poor digestion. I was only going to the toilet, as in terms of number 2, once a day. People think this is normal, and this is the sad thing, is that going to the toilet once a day, for most people, this is normal. If we're eating 3 times a day and only going to the toilet once, it doesn't make much sense, does it? So I was having a lot of issues with digestion. I suspect that I may have had undiagnosed ulcers, which may have been contributing to my anxiety and depression. I had bleeding from the anus, so regularly I had fissures, so opening up and bleeding from my anus, hemorrhoids. I thought that I was eating quite healthy for the most part, but I wasn't. And this was evident through what I was experiencing in my GI tract. And they say that the stomach is, your main mind, right? Your first mind, I believe. And that makes sense, because the gut to mind connection, when you're not good in your gut, you're not good in your mind, right? And so this was definitely a reflection for me on what I experienced. So that was probably one of the most uncomfortable symptoms that I had. Some other symptoms that just plagued me pretty much my whole adult life was being a woman. Cystitis. I had just the most intense urinary tract infections, which I know is now more related to the acidic wastes in our urinary tract, just constantly. It was really debilitating, and not only that, I would also consistently experience regular thrush. That was just consistent throughout my whole adult life. I also had a number of skin issues that would kind of flare up from time to time, seborrheic dermatitis, and then that would spread down the back of my neck, down the backs of my ears. I'm very itchy and painful to the point where sometimes I would lose a lot of my hair. I'd have open wounds on my scalp. It was no good. Another symptom that I had of my inner polluted body was really intense teeth grinding, to the point where I've actually got fractured teeth as a result of it. And from what I've learned through my journey is that typically teeth grinding can be primarily caused by parasite infection. So teeth grinding, I used to wear glasses, I don't wear them anymore. I used to have chronic postnasal drip and that was just all the time. So all of these things that I used to experience, I had pretty much just thought, well, you know, that's just a part of life. In 2019, I had a very deep and intense spiritual awakening, and that sent me on a path of ramping up the self-healing, essentially. It made me just realize that my body is the divine temple for my eternal spirit, and if I'm trashing my body and not looking after it, then I'm not really going to be in touch with my eternal self or higher self. I started really ramping up my efforts to redeem myself. That's the best way to put it. But it was funny because after the awakening of sorts, I actually had this deep inherent feeling that I shouldn't be eating flesh. And it wasn't coming from a vegan perspective in terms of the animal rights activism movement or, you know, that philosophy. It was more just coming from a deep knowing of we shouldn't be eating animals, right? And of course, having that compassion for animals as well is a big part of it. But it was like I just knew I just didn't want to eat animals anymore. It took me a while to get my head around this. I had some cognitive dissonance with it because I was very much programmed with the blood type science. There was some other interference that was happening in terms of making the decision to transition to a plant-based lifestyle. That being said, I started experimenting more with fasting, and at the same time I was also cutting out harmful substances, so I stopped drinking. You'd probably be shocked to hear that I used to smoke cigarettes a lot, so on and off for 20 years. Smoke cigarettes. So I knew in my mind I need to break these addictions and vices. So alcohol was the first to go, and then after that the cigarettes kind of came with that, but the cigarettes lingered for a little bit longer. But I knew that I needed to cut these things out of my life. Drugs, they were just gone instantly. I put those to the side pretty much straight away. And you know, I wasn't really taking any pharmaceutical drugs because of my experiences with vaccines, but recreational drugs, I was still doing those. So put those to the side, put the cigarettes to the side, and alcohol. And then I slowly started also introducing more raw foods and more fruits. And this was something that just instinctively happened for me. I don't know, it was like this knowing of just going to the raw foods was the way. And I didn't really know where I was going with it. It was just something that gradually happened over time. It wasn't like I was planning it. And then as I mentioned, I started experimenting with juice fasting. So I was experimenting with raw juice fasting anywhere between 3 to 7 days, and I was doing that clearly. And I loved it. I loved it. And I just felt really connected to the idea of fasting. There was, I think it was in late 2022, I was actually on a raw juice fast, and I hadn't even really planned on doing this raw juice fast. When I would do a juice fast, usually I would decide maybe like the day before that I was going to do it. And I'm like, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to do a fast and I'll do it for 3 or 7 days. And so I planned this, well, I hadn't even really planned, I just ended up on this juice fast. While I was on this juice fast, I watched this story about this man called Andy, who had done 109 days using this particular protocol using cooked grape juice. And I just went, wow, this is incredible. And he healed himself from ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, severe anxiety and depression, and also just spoke to the spiritual element that he experienced on the fasting journey. And it really just resonated with me, and I went, this is me. This is what I'm doing. I'm gonna jump on this protocol. So I did. I just as soon as I watched the movie, I went out and I bought the elements that I needed to do this protocol, and I just started it. I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. There was one critical element that I was missing. I didn't have an enema kit, and I just went, I don't care, I'm going to start. So I ordered the enema kit that was on the way, and I just started the protocol. And within a few days, I had the most horrendous waste falling out of me. I could not believe it. And from then onwards, I think the horror of what was coming out of me really spurred me on to just keep going. I had no expectations about how long I was going to go on the fast. Initially, I thought I was just going to experiment and do 10 days on this protocol. Then I saw the horrendous waste that was coming out of me. And by day 10, I was like, well, I just have to keep going. And I thought maybe I'll go for 20 days. And I got to 20 days and it was still coming out, even more so. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just keep going. So then I think I just thought, well, I'll shoot for 40 days because, you know, Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So that sounds like a pretty good number. And I got to 40 days and then the waste was still coming out. And I just went, wow, okay. And the waste just actually ramped up. It was like more parasites, more of the mucoid plaque. And, you know, sometimes I think mucoid plaque can get confused for ropeworms, but whatever it was coming out of me, and it was horrifying and it stank like death. And it was really confronting to see the stuff that was inside of me. And it really just woke me up because, you know, you normalize a certain way of living. You normalize symptoms that we're living with day to day. I had actually thought that I had been quite healthy because over the years I had experimented with all these diets and, you know, gluten-free and keto, paleo and blood type diet, as I said, and thought that I was definitely living a lot better than most. And you know what, I probably was, but the reality was that I was still a cesspit inside. It was a big awakening, and I actually did go through a slight depressive state during my fast, and I actually call long fasting going through dark night of the soul on crack, because you really have to face everything. You don't have the food to distract yourself. We're so used to suppressing our emotions with food, the same way that our parents taught us to regulate our emotions with food. It was what I've directly experienced and realized, especially on the fast, is the connection to food and our emotions, and how if at any point we do have something stressful come up, a lot of the time we'll just reach for food to suppress it. A lot of us don't even know what true hunger feels like. A lot of the cravings we have are related to emotional, or our nervous system being dysregulated emotionally, and then we'll use the food to suppress that. And then also the parasite cravings, which, you know, that's another topic for another day. So when you're going through this long fasting process, all of these emotions are coming up, and you can't run away from them. You have to face them. You don't have the food to suppress the emotions or distract yourself with. So when all of these emotions were coming up, and how I had to self-reflect on how I'd poisoned my body so badly over my lifetime, and then I was seeing the evidence of that come up, I really had to face it all. You know, I had to raw dog it with no food. So it is essentially what I call dark night of the soul and crack. You have to face everything that comes up and admit to yourself that the primary cause of our disease is actually our own fault. So there is a level of forgiveness that comes with that as well, having to forgive yourself. So that was definitely a process that I had to go through on my fast, and it comes in waves, the emotions, because a lot of the emotions are also trapped in our bodies. Well, we have these stagnant emotions that we haven't been able to release because we've been suppressing it with food for our whole life. So all of these things come up, and that was definitely an interesting experience for me. But I ended up getting to day 89, and that's when I decided to break fast. I was experiencing extreme detox symptoms, a lot of acidic waste coming through my urinary tract. So I decided to break fast at that point. And to be honest, I didn't really have any expectations about how long I was going to go, but I just knew that that was the best time for me to break. And then I transitioned slowly back into eating. Now, during my period on my long fast, I had no intentions, like zero intentions of transitioning to a raw and fruit-based diet. Well, I had this belief that being a blood type O, I needed flesh to nourish my body. I knew that it was a lighter diet, eating more fruits and vegetables, but I still believed that eggs and flesh, for example, were needed. But lo and behold, on my long fast, I did actually decide that I was going to open myself up and to new information, and I started reading a lot. And I read Arnold Ehret's books, I read The Mucusless Diet Healing System, I read Rational Fasting, also read other books such as Man's Higher Consciousness by Hilton Hetema, The Great Cure by Johanna Brandt. There was some other books I read, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But as I read these books, started listening to a lot of Dr. Morse as well, Dr. Robert Morse, I really got into natural hygiene as well. So a combination of all these mentors and philosophies, I found that there was a common theme. And the common theme is that we are that of a frugivore. So we're designed as a frugivore primate. And that is what we are anatomically, physiologically, and biologically designed as. Our species-specific diet is actually a raw and fruit-based diet, which is the least obstructive and the least injurious to us. So once I kind of found this common truth, it was really hard to deny it. You see the comparative analysis and you're like, wow, it's actually undeniable. And then you also experience like how your body cleans itself. And then coming off my long fast, the post-fast protocol was very strict. I hadn't eaten in 3 months, and it was very specific in the fact that I needed to be eating food that was least harmful to me, which was fruit, right? So I did. And as my body became attuned to eating again, I found that I was incredibly sensitive to things that were not meant to be in my body anymore. So if I would put things in my body that were outside of the species-specific diet, I would get instant feedback. And this is really interesting to me because over our lifetime, as we eat foods, we become desensitized to them. Our body becomes accustomed to eating them. Not only that, we also get this mucoid plaque, which wraps around the GI tract. And even though this stuff is not good, it does somewhat, protect your mucosa from all the horrible things you're putting inside of it. So you don't get this instant feedback. So we become incredibly desensitized. So once my body had been cleaned at this really deep level, I had my senses back again. And that was also very affirming to me that we are frugivores and we are meant to eat this way. So I still had some residual cognitive dissonance about it, and I just thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to be the explorer. I'm going to keep an open mind. I'm going to experiment with this lifestyle, and I'm going to give it a red hot crack. And I did. And over time, it just became more affirmed in my mind that this is the way that we're meant to live. Just the level of vitality and health that I have compared to what I did before I did my long fast, when I was eating flesh and eggs and other things that I don't eat anymore. I just can't even compare how I felt then to now. So experiencing truly is the way that we find the truth, and that's what I've done. So yeah, that's pretty much my story to date. In conclusion, based off what I've experienced, really just promote everyone to get out there and just give it a go. There's a lot of people who will kind of sit on the sidelines and they'll cast stones about this lifestyle. And I think also one thing that makes it really confusing to people is the vegan movement. I don't align myself to veganism because that, in my mind, it's a philosophy that focuses on animals' rights, and it doesn't really holistically cover our health. For me, I just say that I'm living as nature intended, following our species-specific diet. And by doing that, we don't only just honor ourselves in terms of our health, we honor the animals, and we also honor the earth. So it's a more holistic approach. The vegan movement, in my mind, has been very damaging for trying to help people see the light in terms of how they can heal themselves using fasting and fruit and raw foods as well. What I encourage people to do is put your money where your mouth is. If you really want to judge it, give it a go. Get out there, do some fasting, keep an open mind. and then give the raw and fruit-based lifestyle a go. And I mean, don't just give it a go for a few months. You need to give it a go for a good year before you're gonna know and find the truth. Over that time on that journey, it will affirm to you more and more so. That's my advice to everyone. I hope that my story helps people find their way onto this path. I would also like to add that to be able to do this transition successfully, one definitely does need to keep an open mind. They need to be able to admit that they were wrong about many things, which I had to do. And I had to forgive myself, as I mentioned. Some values that people need to embody is persistence, because this journey it's not always rainbows and butterflies. It can be really confronting. We can have a lot of physical, emotional, and mental challenges as we go through the detoxification process. And it can be scary at sometimes as well, because your body's going through all these changes and you don't really know what to expect. We're really going against the mainstream views about healing. So persistence is incredibly important. We have to have the ability to persist through being uncomfortable, right? So it's almost having this ability to be comfortable in the uncomfortable and embrace it, because it is redemption. This is redemption. We're redeeming ourselves from the sins that we've done against ourselves. One of the biggest lessons I learned, and one of the other values that people must value, is patience. And it is very similar to persistence, but being patient is so incredibly important, so incredibly important. We've been programmed to have this quick fix mentality where we want everything now. And in the realm of healing and undoing the sins that we've done to ourselves, it takes time. What I've learned from one of the mentors that I learned to fast off is that it can take up to 9 years to clean the body. So we've really just got to settle in, walk the path with grace and patience and love for ourselves. So that's another incredibly important value. And another one is self-responsibility. Because if we're going to be our own self-healer, we have to be self-responsible. We have to be 100% accountable to ourselves. Nobody can do the work for us. We are the ones who have to do the work. We can get guidance, of course, and this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to help guide people through their journeys. And I think it's incredibly important. I had guides on my journey as well, but ultimately we are the ones who must do the work. And another thing that is incredibly important, and I did mention or touch on it a little bit, is keeping an open mind, is finding your inner key, that inner key that is going to allow you to let go of these limiting beliefs and have the right mindset. Because if we don't have the right mindset, essentially we can, for a better word, cock block our ability to successfully walk the path of self-healing. So yeah, mindset is incredibly important as well. The power of the mind, we should never underestimate the power of the mind. Have a combination of, our mindset, the right mindset, and then also healing our body temple. Incredible things happen. I've witnessed and also experienced incredible things on my journey and people that I've guided. If you truly want to heal yourself, if you want to take control of your health and step out of the clutches of mainstream medicine, this is the path. I hope this helps, and I truly hope to see you in my community, which is the Inner Key Association. But please reach out if you have any questions. Always happy to have a chat and connect.